The trauma from spending years locked away, often in horrific prison conditions, is one that can't be abated by any amount of money, as you'll hear from Maurice Caldwell. He was recently granted a settlement in a lawsuit against the city of San Francisco after being wrongfully convicted of murder and spending 20 years in prison. Nicholas visited Caldwell at his home in Sacramento to learn more. Just a heads up, Caldwell describes police brutality in telling his story, and you'll also hear from the officer himself, who denies accusations that he framed Caldwell and says everything he did was above board.
It was June 30th, 1990. A man named Judy Acosta had just been shot dead in the Alamany projects of San Francisco after a drug deal went bad. Over the next few weeks, police would close in on a suspect named Maurice Caldwell. No physical evidence linked him to the crime, but in 1991, a jury found him guilty of murder based on the testimony of one eyewitness. Caldwell would spend the next 20 years in prison before his conviction was overturned.
For anybody that's in prison for a crime that they didn't do, and the people who sent you there know you didn't do it, that's so unbearable, because you got to try to fit in your life that I'm here right now and I got to stop fighting the feeling, and I got to just go with it, because the things I fight is going to just have me more messed up.
That's Maurice Caldwell. He spoke with me at his home near Sacramento after he settled a civil lawsuit against the city of San Francisco for $8 million last year.
A man wrongly convicted of murder will receive an $8 million settlement.
Caldwell grew up in the Alamany projects at a time when a crack cocaine epidemic was wreaking havoc on black communities across the United States.
Because of the violence that surrounds crack, a large proportion of black families live in volatile and unsafe neighborhoods.
Caldwell admits he engaged in some bad behavior as a kid. He served more than 4 years in a youth detention center for robbery and assault. He doesn't deny that he used to sell crack for money, but he also says he didn't feel like he had a lot of other options at the time.
Everybody look at projects as drug dealers. Drug dealers, bad drug dealers, they're killers, they're whatnot. But there's nobody to sit back and accept the fact that those are outlets. You know what I'm saying? Like, people from other neighborhoods had opportunities of getting good jobs or getting better, education. But if you're a person from the projects and you get into one encounter for, you get arrested for any little thing, that sits with you.
On the night of the murder, Caldwell says he was in bed with his girlfriend at his aunt's house when he heard 3 loud booms.
Boom, boom, boom.
Caldwell says he then ran outside to see what was happening and if anyone needed help. According to Caldwell, he had nothing to do with the drug deal or the shooting that followed it. But once police zoomed in on him as a suspect, he says they never considered that someone else might be guilty of the crime.
When I get arrested, they don't look for nobody else. You know what I'm saying? They don't care about nobody else.
When police first interviewed Mary Cobb, the only witness willing to talk to police at the time, she told them she saw 2 shooters from her window and that both were people she didn't know from outside the neighborhood. She later changed her story and identified Caldwell, who lived right next door to her, as the shooter. The district attorney who prosecuted Caldwell said Cobb didn't initially identify him because she feared retaliation. But Caldwell's lawyer Terry Gross says Cobb's statement shifted after police spoke with her in an unrecorded interview, something that violated department protocol at the time, requiring that those conversations be recorded.
But it's only after they got her to identify Mr. Caldwell that they turn on a tape recorder and they do a reenactment of the procedure instead of tape recording originally, as they should have. And it becomes clear that they've made an offer to her. They've told her they're going to protect her. They'll relocate her from the projects if she makes an identification and testifies at trial.
After Cobb identified Caldwell as the shooter, Gross said police pretty much stopped investigating the crime and became laser-focused on getting Caldwell convicted. In exchange for her testimony, Cobb was moved out of the projects, received $1,000, got a key to the city, a new job, and a trip to Disneyland. Studies conducted after the trial showed Cobb couldn't have witnessed the shooting in the way she described it to jurors. She said Caldwell was standing under a streetlight about 24 feet from her window, but the streetlight was actually more than 70 feet away from her window, and part of a building was blocking the streetlight from view. Paige Kaneb, a supervising attorney with the Northern California Innocence Project, helped get Caldwell's conviction overturned in 2010. She said it's understandable why Cobb agreed to go along with police pushing her to identify Caldwell as the shooter.
She had 2 young kids, and it was a really bad time in San Francisco projects and San Francisco in general in terms of like the crack epidemic going on. And, you know, they offered her a better life for her kids, and what parent wouldn't take that?
Police also never interviewed 2 men that other witnesses had identified as the shooters, even after one of those men, Maurice Caldwell, confessed to being the shooter years later.
No one from the state ever even went to talk to him. I mean, like, he's in prison. It's not like it would have been hard.
Maurice Caldwell signed a confession and said Caldwell wasn't involved. He is currently in prison in Nevada for another homicide.
Caldwell says if police had arrested the real killer back then, another man's life may have been spared.
I got one of them cases that society have always feared. Y'all got the wrong killer and went and let the real killer kill again.
In 2010, a judge overturned Caldwell's murder conviction after finding his previous lawyer had been ineffective at trial. Kaneb said Caldwell's trial lawyer made little to no effort to investigate Mary Cobb's story or interview other witnesses.
He now says that he went out in a suit and no one spoke to him, which totally makes sense. And no decent investigator or even an attorney who's, knows how to do any kind of investigation would ever start an investigation that way and stop there, with one try.
Caldwell was released from prison in 2011 after the city declined to retry him for murder. The prosecution's only witness, Cobb, died 13 years earlier, leaving the city with scant evidence to present to a jury.
The district attorney's office told me that they did want to proceed to a retrial, but the key witness has already passed away and the court has destroyed some of the evidence.
Caldwell's present-day lawyer, Terry Gross, says when it came to investigating the murders of black men in the projects, police were more interested in closing cases than obtaining justice.
When cases involved crimes that took place, or particularly murders that took place in the projects, where they're minority on minority murders, they just didn't care. They just didn't give as much attention as if when a victim was white. Once they had a potential suspect, they ignored other evidence of innocence. They didn't care about looking at evidence of innocence, and all they did was to try and gather evidence of guilt.
But according to Caldwell, institutional racism isn't the only reason he spent 2 decades behind bars. He also blames a black narcotics officer named Kitt Crenshaw, who he says framed him for murder.
Crenshaw was like the diamond in the rough in my life when it came to this crime, man. I wouldn't have been in prison if it wasn't for him.
Caldwell says Officer Crenshaw used to repeatedly stop and search him on the street for no reason. He believes Crenshaw singled him out for harassment because he always protested the unfair treatment.
When it come to me, he always looked at me as I was always rebellious against him, that I would never fold, I would never give in, I would never just bow down.
In January 1990, 6 months before the Judy Acosta murder, police chased a group of young men suspected of shooting out streetlights in the projects. Caldwell says Officer Crenshaw found him hiding in a vehicle, handcuffed him, threw him in the back of a squad car, and drove him to a remote location after Caldwell refused to disclose the whereabouts of a gun police were looking for.
They went in the dark area. Crenshaw got out the car, opened the back seat, and got me out the car. I'm like, this ain't no police station. What the fuck is going on? This ain't police business right here, man. This is some goddamn mob shit.
It was in this secluded area where Caldwell says Crenshaw choked him, threw him against a wall, held his head to the ground, and told his partner to drive over his head if he didn't reveal the location of a gun.
That man snatched my neck. I'm talking about snatched my neck, and was squeezing my neck, man. Man, my eyes is like the movie, like them funny movies where your eyes and shit coming out of your tongue. Man, that's how I remember I was, man. Man, I'm just so hurt, man. The man doing me bad, man. He threw me down on the ground, man. I ain't fighting him. I'm in handcuffs, man. This man is beating me up. He threw me to the ground, man, and he put my head behind the back of the tire. At all this time, the uniformed police is still in the front seat and in the passenger driver's seat. He told police, he said, man, if he don't tell me what I want to know right now, you run his motherfucking head over. And that's when I was like, man, I tell you, man. I tell you, I was tore up, man.
Caldwell filed a complaint against Crenshaw with the city's police watchdog agency. 6 months later, while that complaint was still pending, Crenshaw stopped and questioned Caldwell about the Judy Acosta murder. A homicide detective would later tell Caldwell's lawyer that he never would have let Crenshaw be involved in the investigation had he known about the pending complaint against him. Caldwell claims Crenshaw falsified a statement in which Caldwell said he was involved in a drug deal before the murder, even though Caldwell previously told investigators he had no involvement. Caldwell's lawyer said it was this false report that made his client the number one suspect in the murder investigation.
The homicide inspectors in their depositions, they said, that's what made us focus on Mr. Caldwell, because he was telling us something different than what Officer Crenshaw had written down.
According to Caldwell's lawsuit, Crenshaw also handcuffed Caldwell, walked him up to the witness Mary Cobb's front door while she was speaking to a detective, and announced, "This is the guy I was telling you about, Twan," using Caldwell's nickname. Caldwell's lawyer said that's the kind of improper police tactic that can taint a witness's identification of a suspect.
It's improper to do what Officer Crenshaw did, which it's called a show-up. And you never bring a suspect in front of a witness just by themselves, without a randomized situation like a lineup or something like that.
Caldwell believes he never would have been convicted of murder had it not been for Officer Crenshaw.
I'm here to say, and I would say it to the day I die, to speak. Crenshaw was the most crookedest officer in the world. And I'm talking about dangerous one. It was no playing with him. He want to be the man of all the mans. They used to call him Kitt the Man. That's what they call him, And he was out to break me. It was three things he was going to do. He wanted to break me, or he wanted to kill me, or he wanted to send me to prison. He couldn't break me. He couldn't kill me. But he sent me to prison.
But Officer Crenshaw, who was promoted to police commander before retiring from the department in 2011, tells a different story.
My name is Kitt Edwin Crenshaw, Jr. I'm a retired member of the San Francisco Police Department. I'm retired as commander.
Crenshaw denies that he routinely stopped, searched, and harassed Caldwell prior to January 24, 1990, the night Caldwell claims Crenshaw beat and choked him.
Mr. Caldwell is lying. Before the incident of him shooting a gun that night, I personally have never had any other contact with Caldwell other than maybe approving a police report or maybe overseeing a report that he possessed a weapon and was discharging a weapon in the city and county.
I asked Crenshaw if he assaulted and strangled Caldwell in a dark, secluded area that night. He adamantly denied the charges.
Nicholas, for that to occur, there would be some physical evidence. There would be strangulation marks. There would be wounds to the face. There would be marks on the body. Look at Mr. Caldwell's booking photo.
Photographs of Caldwell from that night are under seal and couldn't be viewed, but Caldwell's lawyer saw the photos and acknowledged that they don't show obvious signs of assault or strangulation. Caldwell says Officer Crenshaw knew how to hurt and intimidate someone like him without leaving clearly visible marks. Evidence presented in Caldwell's civil suit showed Officer Crenshaw had more than 60 complaints filed against him during his career, and that the investigating Office of Citizen Complaints recommended sustaining claims against him in several cases, but Crenshaw never faced disciplinary action. Crenshaw told me the number of complaints filed against him was not abnormal when compared to the amount of time he spent on the street making arrests and interacting with the public.
More active officers are going to have more complaints because you're going to have more exposure. If I was sitting behind the desk, I probably wouldn't have 0 complaints. I wouldn't have a complaint at all.
While he denies having assaulted Caldwell in January 1990, Crenshaw admits he exchanged words with Caldwell in a jail cell that night. Caldwell claims Crenshaw threatened to kill him. Crenshaw says he was simply giving Caldwell some friendly advice.
I was trying to give him a face-to-face, a man-to-man, heart-to-heart talk, saying, basically, son, basically, kid, you're going to get killed because of what you're doing is going to cause me to have to take some action next time. I basically tried to give him some insight, saying next time he was not going to be so lucky.
Crenshaw also denies having falsified Caldwell's statement about what he was doing the night of the murder, and he denies bringing Caldwell to the witness Mary Cobb's front door before she identified him as the shooter.
If I were trying to set Mr. Caldwell, why wouldn't I, produce a gun or produce some other evidence to put Mr. Caldwell at the murder scene? The day I stopped him, if I were trying to set him up, why wouldn't I plant a gun on him? None of that occurred because none of this is true.
Do you think it was appropriate to take a statement from someone who had a complaint pending against you?
Of course. I mean, it was a case that was being investigated. It was an active case. If someone files a complaint, which you said many people have made a complaint, what, I supposed to just totally disregard him?
Have you heard that someone else confessed to this murder?
Yes. Allegedly, some guy that knows Mr. Caldwell said that he was there and Mr. Caldwell wasn't. Okay. Then in Mr. Caldwell's trial, why weren't those people present at his hearing?
Caldwell says his trial lawyer failed to put up an effective defense. Crenshaw says Caldwell blames everyone other than himself for the bad things that happened to him. I had a few more questions for Officer Crenshaw. Do you believe Maurice Caldwell is innocent?
No, I do not. No, Mr. Caldwell was involved with that murder. He was identified by the witness. The evidence that homicide, either by witness accounts or by their own work, proved Mr. Caldwell was one of the shooters.
Why do you think the city decided to settle this lawsuit?
Look at the state of policing now. Fortunately for Mr. Caldwell, the Floyd case happened. The police brutality cases happened. The police incidents of shooting innocent, unarmed individuals has happened. That's why. And why did Mr. Caldwell settle for the term he settled for? Why wouldn't he have taken it to trial? Why not go ahead and pursue it and make $100 million? Wouldn't you? If someone had done you wrong, convict you, and you had done time for a murder you didn't commit, wouldn't you see it to the end? I would. I was willing to go to trial.
Caldwell's lawyer thinks the city chose to settle in part because evidence emerged that a tape recording was altered, a recording from the night Crenshaw is accused of assaulting Caldwell.
There was 20-minute segment of this tape recording that was missing. And it was the exact segment where Mr. Caldwell said that he was taken to this remote location. And it was pretty amazing that someone had obviously tampered with this tape recording.
Crenshaw insists that the tape was never altered.
They're lying. How is it altered? Altered by whom? By the city? I mean, the real reason why this case settled is because of the length of time. I think the homicide office ended up changing officers multiple times. There was some degradation in the The file itself, I believe all the parts of the file was not there.
Crenshaw acknowledges that the criminal justice system can be unfair to young black men in the projects, but he doesn't think that's what happened in the case of Maurice Caldwell.
There's institutional racism. America's not perfect. Justice isn't perfect. But sometimes they get it right. In the Caldwell case, they got it right.
Caldwell says $8 million won't make up for the 20 years he lost in prison, or the people he lost, like his mother and grandmother, who passed away while he was incarcerated. But he hopes the settlement can provide some measure of justice and help him provide a better life for his family.
No amount of money could compensate me for what I've been through, but it could make me feel better, than knowing that I got vindication, for what they did wrong. No amount of money, could replace the time I lost and the people I lost, man. But it could help my kids, man. I can make their life secure. Like I say, it's never a fairy tale ending on things. I don't want a fairy tale ending. I just want a righteous ending, Everything can just be righteous with me.